Hi guys, it's Ross here from the Tower Stern podcast. So for today's tactical rundown, I thought it would be fun to bring on my co-host Ben and sort of discuss some of the aspects of the 4-2-3-1. So I'm going to cut back and forth between that discussion and then some other concepts that I just wanted to break down a little bit more here today. So I hope you enjoy it. Remember to like and retweet, subscribe this, whatever you want to do. All that stuff is great and we appreciate it. So let's get into it.
Welcome to another episode of Ross's. What are we calling these?
Thing.
Ross's
We were
Reading
just talking about this.
Rundown.
Ross's tactical thing.
Yeah, Ross's tactical thing. He's invited me along to this one, which is quite exciting for me because anyone who listens to what we do knows I don't really go into the tactic element of it. I always leave that to Ross. But you will have seen, over the last few weeks that Ross has done a lot of videos and a lot of kind of different components of what we've been doing in the games, really. And this one is it's kind of focusing on the shift from a previous formation, which was obviously 4-1-4-1, to a kind of a more approachable. Is that the right word, Ross? I don't know,
I
but
think so. I think it's a
kind of
formation. I think it's a formation more like kids will have played in their youth. I mean, they can both be coached out of a 4-3-3, which is especially common over here in the States. I was always taught in a 4-4-2 when I was a kid. But
old school.
yeah, old school. But a lot of formations come out of this sort of structure now. So I think this is a good thing. Reason it was good to have you along for this today, Ben, is because I know you like talking about the midfield and
Love the midfield.
a lot of
Yeah.
what's going on with the 4-2-3-1 is related to the midfield. Um, so yeah, let me run through a few uses of it. Initially, we saw it against Lincoln for a full game. We saw Savage come in for Craig on the 64th minute that day. So obviously, we normally think of Savage as our more creative, our player who can really play a range of passes. We saw a little bit of that yesterday against Stevenage, whereby he's really good at these sort of just like one touch changes of the play, whereby he'll take the ball from one side to the other. Just realized you're wearing a Wales top while I'm talking about Savage. But he's also good at his long ball delivery, of course. So we had a cross that came about last night because of Charlie Savage basically picking up the ball on the left side and putting it over to Femi. So we get a little bit of both with Savage. And obviously in this sort of 4-2-3-1, he's got a bit more license, a bit more defensive cover. And then
I
the
mean,
other... Go
we
ahead.
talked a lot to interrupt you. We talked a lot
No,
about
go.
those two players, and I think there is there is a well held narrative in the fan base where it's like you either play one or the other, right? I guess without sort of moving away from what we're talking about here, how comparable are they in this formation of a 4-2-3-1? So, for example, if we're playing 4-1-4-1, it seems to me that Craig might be favourable in that one in terms of the protection of the back four. But in this 4-2-3-1, are we kind of leaning towards Savage being better in terms of working with Lewis Wing, for example, in this formation?
I think touching on Lewis Wing is actually an interesting point here because I think part of why this has come about is because Lewis Wing, when we were playing in the 4-1-4-1, was often having to drift into that right back position, which was going okay in terms of creating chances, but it then had him out of the way. I think the Savage suits this double pivot position better personally than Craig, but I do think that they can both do it. And I also think they're both, like 20 years old. So maybe in a year or two, they'll be even better at doing it. But I think that this has partially been done because Wing needed to be brought back into the middle of the field so that he could impact more of the game. And I think that Savage has benefited from that because Wing's been playing pretty well defensively over the last few weeks as well. So having a defensive partner alongside Savage is something I think that's allowed him to just focus more on moving the play around him and creating chances and things like that. So I would say that they're both sort of suited for either, but if you're going to play the 4-1-4-1 at the moment, Craig is probably better. But I don't think the formation shift is necessarily about those two. All right, so here are some notable recent uses. So obviously, last night we're recording this on Wednesday, February the 7th. So last night we went up to Stevenage and beat them with less than 50% share of possession. Same again with Derby. Both games in which we saw a decent amount of XG against, and then against Leighton Orient as well, which is where this picture comes from here. Quite a lot of XG against, but with Wigan keeping it a lot tighter. And this is kind of a really interesting performance in contrast to the Wigan performance in which we actually won at the Medeski a few months earlier. I think if you look back at the underlying numbers from that, we actually played better on the road against Wigan, but came away with a loss. Whereas we, at home, came away with a win, obviously. So just shows small margins in football. But this is a great picture that came from Sim. This is Sim's spot in the stand. So maybe you now know if you sit near our editor. But you can just see clear as day here the 4-2-3-1 against Leighton Orient. You've got Savage and Wing here in the middle, and then Makairu, Nibs, and Aziz on the other side, with Smith just keeping the play stretched vertically, basically. So really easy way to just spot this. And then let's take a look here. Basically, what we're looking at is how this sort of double pivot can allow us to build up through the middle. Something that, when we do it, we're quite successful, but we don't do it much, which we talked about during the build up video. But what we're looking at here, basically, you get Wing and Savage coming in. This is right after a free kick in our half. They're occupying three separate Derby players here. So this guy, he's kind of stood between Wing and Bindon. So if the ball does come out to Bindon, he can get out there. But the number 8 here for Derby has started creeping towards Wing as well, in case that ball comes here to stop him from turning. Now, that small little bit of commitment from Derby and that tiny few steps that he takes this way means that we can actually get the ball straight through the middle. This space here has been vacated. Tom Holmes puts it, admittedly, with a really good pass through the middle. And then we find Harvey Nibs. Derby now have 5 players stranded in Reading's half. So we can't quite see the guy, the number 9, who's up here. We've got these other 4 players here. And we know that Yedom's made his way up. So we're looking at a 6-on-5 in this half. Means we're looking at a 6-on-5 in this half as well. So 5 Reading players, 6 Derby players. It's a pretty favorable situation in which to attack. Even more so once we get out into this huge space here. You can see there's just this gaping wide space after we're able to play it through the middle. And again, this all starts from just drawing more players closer to you in the initial stages in build up to get them out of position earlier. Aziz gets all the way down into the box. This one actually ends in a shot for a Yedom right here eventually. This is the one that crashed off the post. But what I like about this too is that Savage has the license now to get up into the box, get into a place where we've seen him score goals from before, against Millwall, against Charlton in the Pizza Cup, when it was still the Pizza Cup, and things like that. So I just really like how this formation allows us to both defend and attack, and to draw other teams in. All right, so here we're looking at some heat maps versus Stevenage, and just kind of again showing how Wing and Savage are operating as a double pivot. I do think that Savage is now going to play a lot more, given that we are comfortable in this formation at the moment. And you can see that Savage was a little bit more withdrawn than Wing last night. Wing was able to get a little bit further forward more often. And that's why I've included Roberts here for Stevenage. He was the number 10. And his heat map kind of shows you that Stevenage's attacks were going down this right side. So Savage was being called into action more to defend in that particular area.
I mean, you explain that pretty well in terms of the, in and out of possession when we do have the ball in this formation. But what ultimately do you think is the main change from shifting from 4-1-4-1, which we kind of stuck with for most of the season up until, as you said, sort of recent games or recent times, to 4-2-3-1? What's made sellers go, this is what we're going to do from now on in most of the games that we play?
That's a really good question. That does make me go back to wondering if it's partly because Savage can start again more now. We haven't seen Rashisha in that position at all. That doesn't seem to be something that he's interested in. I think partly it's come from further forward again. It's funny, like a lot of these changes happen because of other things. So I was suggesting that maybe they moved out of the 4-1-4-1 because Wing was having to go back to right back a lot and try and build plays from there, which is great until he's then not in the central positions to shoot and things like that. I think that's something else Reading have had trouble with is finding a proper left winger to fill that space on the left wing in the way that Aziz does and really give opposition defenses some trouble. And so bringing us into this sort of 4-2-3-1 where the forward can be a little bit more not central, but certainly in the half space, between the wide areas and the central areas on the left and right side, rather than having to go all the way out wide. I think that's another benefit. I think there are just some small benefits throughout the team, basically, and I think it also allows you to get a bit more out of your squad.
I mean, obviously, talking to the left hand side, we've got Kelvin who started last night. Um, you know, really watered himself down with Steve Evans' tears,
Yeah,
which we all
yeah,
did after last night's fantastic result. Really, so yeah, very very delighted with Steve Evans being unhappy. I have to say,
yeah.
but in terms of that formation, you talked a lot earlier in the season about Nelson Abbey. Before he left us in January, kind of building
Hmm.
the attacks or the ball progression, if you like, from central defence. Do you feel that part of this change now, in terms of the way that we move the ball out of defence, has ultimately had to shift because we've lost the main ball carrier in the defence in Nelson Abbey, or do you think, like you said, in terms of Savage, this is just we had a little bit of success when we sort of dabbled in this, and now he's gone. This is what we're sticking with. This is how we're going to do it, and we don't need necessarily for the defenders to kind of carry the ball out for so much because we've got those two players, at the start of the midfield to kind of progressively bring the ball forward for us.
He does like a little experiment before he shifts to something full time. Like I think that he tried around with the 4-3-3 that eventually turned into the 4-1-4-1 against Portsmouth, for example. But I think that's actually a really good point that Abby's gone, and that kind of means that we need to make some changes to how we build up. We talked about during the build up video about how Abby running the ball out of defense. That's a dynamic way in which Reading can build the play up. And there's really no answer for that. If we're playing a 4-1-4-1 with a single pivot, as we saw against Exeter, you could mark the single pivot out of the game. If we're playing a 4-2-3-1, then maybe you don't have that issue, but then also maybe you have a little bit of trouble getting enough players into the box. But there's no real opposition counter to their centre back can just run around us, other than giving him a bit more space. So I think that's linked to Savage coming back into the team more, actually, in that now that we don't have that dynamic asset to the team in terms of Abbey running out, we have instead the dynamic asset of Savage's passing range, right? In that he can just launch it basically wherever he wants. A lot of our clearances have become a lot more directed in recent weeks, which has been fun to see. So, yeah, good question. That's a good question.
I mean, it talks a little bit about a defensive element there, but with the 4-2-3-1 that we're now kind of employing, I don't know, one of
Fine.
those.
Yeah, yeah. Either
Um, does it make us more creative in terms of opportunities for goals, in terms of goals scored, in terms of kind of forward passes? Really, is it generally speaking for us a more fruitful opportunity to get forward and get some goals in the net,
I would
basically?
say so. I do think that. I mean, I think you can look at. So Reading have had more shots on average in the 4-2-3-1 per 90 than they do in the 4-1-4-1. It's not a crazy change. It's something like 10.5 for 4-2-3-1 and 9.5, something like that. for 4-1-4-1. I also think that I tell you what I think. I think that this allows us to be attacking in a flexible manner. So we were able to attack consistently against Wigan and against Lincoln, not to put the ball in the back of the net. And at some point in the future, we'll talk about our issues with chance creation, but that's for another day. But I think that, we had games like Wigan and Lincoln where we had a lot of control, but then these games against Stevenage and Derby, they were games in which we were being pushed back a lot. And we had to attack in transition, like we talked about. We had to attack with counter attacks and fast breaks and things like that. But in that 4-2-3-1, I think we can do that really effectively. I think that having more players around the ball, to sort of collect passes and break out quickly from corners and set plays into the box and things like that. We just suit that. We got a lot of fast players. So I definitely think it allows us to attack in a more flexible manner. But in general, looking at this is XG against and XG4 for Reading in 4-2-3-1 and 4-1-4-1. This is over 5 different games. I've listed those games that I was charting here. I've left out Cheltenham and Peterborough. Cheltenham for game plan and Lewis Wing basically saying we just didn't play at all in the first 40 minutes with that game. It just seems like a weird outlier during the Christmas period. And then the Peterborough game, I didn't run that one because we switched halfway through that game. So I wanted to go with purely one thing or the other. Basically, if you look at the differential, you can see that we come out a little bit better on 4-2-3-1 and a little bit worse on 4-1-4-1. Overall, this season, we're a little bit under our numbers on XG. Our differential is low. It's not as low as 0.39, though. And I think this sort of talks to, I don't think that the 4-2-3-1 would necessarily be this effective forever moving forward, but I do think that it kind of shows that the 4-1-4-1 has run its course a little bit. Which, by the way, how tough is being a League One manager now, whereby you still have the sort of similar-ish level of players to what you had 10 years ago, but every single coach now is doing what we're doing right here, right in the midweek, and they're just looking at your team, picking it apart and working out how to counter it. It feels often, this happens in the Premier League all the time. There are like half a season bouts of tactical changes that are amazing, and then they just disappear because they get countered and they don't work anymore. And it doesn't feel like that happens quite as quickly in the lower leagues, obviously, but it certainly happens, right? Like we brought in the 4-1-4-1. It worked nicely for a while, and then it got game planned against, and now it doesn't work quite as well. Yeah, I just think it's interesting.
I mean, it also shows you that football analysts are just idiots like us, basically.
This is
Like
true.
they have access to the same information, and they just go through it in more detail and are able to kind of transfer it off to people that are going to have an effect on the game. Really, I mean, before we talk about the benefits of what this provides us as a football club, do you? We talked a lot on the main pod about the summer recruitment and the fact we shed a lot of players and the fact that a lot of players came in, but there was a kind of a specific profile of player that was brought in during that summer transfer window. Do
Mm-hmm.
looking at the balance of our squad now currently on what are we 8th of February, 7th of February,
Yeah, somewhere around there.
does 4-2-3-1 suit the profile of those players better than 4-3-3, dare I say it, and the 4-1-4-1 that we've played this season? Do you feel like the players are far more comfortable with the 4-2-3-1, or is it a combination of confidence, form, and other stuff that goes into the mix when we're looking at this from an analysis point of view?
Yes, I think the squad is more suited to this formation or a 4-3-3, really, but I think that this one makes the most sense. I think that Ben Elliott is suited to that front line of three. I think that, like we talked about, we don't really have a clear left winger in the squad right now. So a Hip Hatchman stepped in there for Stevenage, and he's done so off the bench a few times. But I don't think we expected him to be that player at the start of the season. Certainly when he was mostly starting as a central forward. So I think that it's quite a pound of itchy squad right now. There's a lot of technical players. There's a lot of pretty fast players, but there's quite a lot of technical players who are just reasonably good in a lot of different positions. They can move the ball in small spaces. And I think that, but like I said, there's not a ton of width in the squad, so I think that it just suits having like that sort of like a left attacking mid, right attacking mid, right forward, left forward sort of thing. I just think it's a little bit easier to play for players who aren't able to constantly run down the wing and produce chances that way.
Okay, so in general, this formation is kind of better suited to the profile of players that we've got in the squad currently, and from, let's say, from a casual observer, that's not quite true because obviously I'm fully invested in it. But from a casual tactical point of view, as I always look at it, generically rather than sort of individual bits, that the players tend to look a lot more comfortable. And I think, talk about the benefits, right now, but there's, obviously we're gonna talk about Smith in terms of his lack of goals potentially. But when this works, he's far more involved in the play and he gets a lot more opportunities to get those shots off. Now, admittedly, last night against Stevenage, there was a couple of opportunities that just looked a bit rusty or didn't look quite on it. But generally
Yeah,
speaking, this allows him to make slightly more daring runs, slightly more problematic runs for the defenders that he's up against.
yeah.
So, in terms of generally with the benefits of this formation, what kind of stuff are we looking at, Ross?
I do think that so like I'm not going to talk too much about Kelvin being on the left because we talked about how we have a squad that's a little bit better suited to forwards being able to play in the half space rather than the full wide space, and you'd expect the full wide space more in the 4-1-4-1. And we've talked about Savage as well in his passing, so I do think getting Smith going again is going to be one of the main benefits. I watched all of his shots this year. There haven't been many. There have only been 5 shots from Sam Smith since the sort of, I'm calling it the post-protest return, because obviously with the game abandoned because of protests and everything, the first team squad really went a long time after the Exeter game before properly playing another 90 minutes. The first time being that Wigan away game in which they dominated the game, they just couldn't score. But again, Smith just hasn't been getting enough opportunities to shoot, and most of those shots that he's gotten so far this year have come from long balls forward. I think that putting this 4-2-3-1 together allows us to get Nibs closer to Smith in a way that's going to be positive for both of them, by the way. But I think definitely for Smith as well, it's 7 games without a goal now. So, we could do with him picking up another goal soon just for his confidence as much as anything. And I think that when we're playing Nibs and Wing sort of together-ish in those sort of central roles, Wing would drop back into that right back spot, or he'd move around a little bit more in the defensive third and leave more of the pressing to Nibs. But regardless, just putting 2 players there kind of meant that Nibs was drifting a little bit more to the left, in my opinion, which I think it's great to have him more central. I think as central as we can make Nibs, the better, basically. So yeah, I'd say getting Smith going again is definitely going to be a benefit to this, partly because we take more shots in general when we're playing 4-2-3-1. So should only be to Smith's benefit, really.
I mean, from my point of view, I like the midfield. It's probably the area that I focus on the most, and I thought I've kind of had positives and issues with over the last few seasons with our midfield in general, really. But the other area for me is always a big bugbear is kind of how easily strikers can get isolated in formations, not just in ours, but in any team really. And
Yeah,
I've always been a big fan of either the flat 2 up top, or whether you're playing 2 but you're playing one further higher up the pitch and one just dropping back a little bit just to get close. Because over the course of this season, there has been times where whether that's been Sam Smith, whether that's been Kelvin up top, whether that's been someone else. I feel that we leave huge gaps in the final third between the guy playing right up the top and then and players getting close to him. So
Hmm.
this will take time to bed in if this is what Sellers is going to go with on this current run of form and continue to push that. But I would like to see Smith kind of having a little bit more of an opportunity to capitalise on the amount of work that he's getting through per game, because he's
Yeah.
doing an incredible amount of running and he's really kind of drawing players out so that other players can get forward. But actually, if this does allow Nibs or Aziz or Kelvin or whoever is kind of in those kind of elevated positions in the midfield, just to get a little bit closer to him. And the other thing I would really like to see is if it's going to be Savage that plays more regularly, just allow him to pop those balls through a little bit more. Lewis Wing was doing that regularly, sort of probably pre-Christmas, and now we're not seeing that too much from him. He is getting forward, but we're not. Generally in the team, we're kind of lacking that killer final ball to kind of thread through. And actually, if this allows those players to settle down a little bit, get the ball forward a little bit more, be a little bit more progressive in the forward play that we're running. Um, I mean, in terms of this 4-2-3-1, is this something that you think he's actually going to stick with now, or do you think we're just waiting for the next loss, which hopefully won't be for a long time, and then he brings
Right.
it and starts again, or is
And
this
then
something that we're going to go? This is what we're doing now, lads. This is the formation that Reading Football Club are going to play. This is the kind of thing that we want to see for the rest of the season. Going through these games to get us out of this relegation scrap, basically.
I think my core argument with this video is we should. This is the formation we should use for the rest of the season. Perhaps we'll see returns of more defensive formations for some games, such as we've got Portsmouth away coming. That's going to be a tough game. I think maybe Derby away as well, which will also be a tough game, obviously. But we've also got runs now against some of the lower placed teams in the division, and I think that one of the things that we haven't done a great job of so far since this period of turnaround, since November, is score a lot of goals. We haven't done that much at all. We've been kind of reliant on one or two players to score those goals for us. I think that in general, the whole team attacks better in this formation. I do think that they have off games, in inverted commas, defensively more often. But if it's allowing us to score 2 or 3 goals a game rather than like one or two, I think that's a positive. So really, at this point, it's only likely that we'll see one more decent sized formation switch before the end of the season. I'm hoping it's to this, and this should give us a good sense of whether this is going to be a formation we can use moving forward into next season. I think it's unlikely at this point that Sellers doesn't start next season as Reading manager, if Reading start the 24-25 season. So I think that, testing out this more expansive, less relegation zone style, if to use a crass term, I think this is only a benefit for us.
I mean, I think ultimately anyone watching this would go, do you know what? As long as we get out of this and we win games and we pick up points, I don't care what formation we play. But
Yeah,
actually,
yeah.
we've been starved as Reading fans for so long of not really having an identity and not really having an aesthetic element to how we play. It's either even in the Yap Stam season, it wasn't good football at all, but it got the job done, and we knew exactly what we'd expect. Every match day in terms of the formation and the way that we were playing.
Hmm.
Again, hate to bring it up, but same with Ince. Like it didn't work towards the end, but we knew, to a point what we were going to expect from a Paul Ince team and so on. So it would be really nice to have this kind of ethos. Filling through the club and kind of building through all the teams that we've got at youth level and under 18s and under 21s and so on.
Hmm.
And if this works and we can start to build some momentum with this particular formation, then great. Let's do it. But ultimately, all we want is to win games and to get out of this. And if this is the shift that we're going to move to, then
Hmm.
fantastic. Really, really
I
good
think
stuff.
that 4-1-4-1 was the shift that we made to get the confidence back into the team and get the things moving in the right direction. And now this is the change to make to become more expansive and really capitalize on that increased confidence in the team. That was my
And
mission
I think,
statement.
the biggest compliment I can give this is obviously, fresh off last night, really, really good result.
Mm-hmm.
They never, we never looked like we were going to lose the game. And I think, regardless of what you say, the goal was was shambolic, really. But if those go in your favour, again, it doesn't matter. It really doesn't matter. But actually, we looked pretty solid throughout. I never
Yeah,
thought we are going to lose this game here. We're in trouble of conceding a goal or whatever. It looked as solid as it has looked for a long time. Um, and that's a kind of in contrast to Saturday against Oxford when we weren't really in the game, didn't deserve to get anything out of it until around the 74th, 75th minute, and then we
right.
probably should have nicked it. So that was obviously a personnel thing rather than a formation thing. But actually, there were lots of positives coming out of this run of one loss in 11 league games or something, which is
Yeah, 10 or
quite
11.
phenomenal, really. Considering where we've been over the last few months, that's quite an incredible turnaround.
Yeah.
Um,
I
so
actually was
yeah,
going to say the Oxford result. So they actually did play a 4-1-4-1 in much of the Oxford thing. And we talked about it on the podcast, but that kind of annoyed me because they were playing better in a 4-2-3-1. And I thought it seemed that the idea was that they'd play that against, teams they considered to be better teams. Well, Stevenage and Oxford are right next to each other in the table. So I'm not really sure why those teams required a different approach. Maybe there's something in the game plan for the other team that I'm not aware of there. But yeah, I
yeah.
would have. I think that you know in the way that I was saying, Sellers likes his experiments to check and see if another formation might work every now and again. This almost felt like, I hope, a last experiment to see if there's anything left, any legs left in the 4-1-4-1. And now I kind of hope we're done with that.
And it was frustrating, without this turning into like the extension of the main podcast. But like
Yeah, right.
he said after the game, oh yeah, we came here to win against Oxford. I completely disagree with that. I don't think that was the case at all. I think he just went with the mentality of not lose. Whereas last night, the amount of energy and the amount of commitment to the forward play, if you like. All right, it didn't come off, but like actually trying to build things and trying to be a bit more progressive in what we were trying to do, despite the fact that we didn't have a shot on target. But there was just something different about last night, and actually, that this is it's a really good point you made there, Ross, about hopefully the Oxford game or the first 70 minutes of the Oxford game was the last time that we would see the 4-1-4-1 deployed, because actually we look
Mm-hmm.
better all round in the 4-2-3-1. So yeah, long may it continue. That just about sums it up or wraps it up for this particular tactical rundown. We're still
Yep.
trying to settle on a name, but in the
Oh yeah.
meantime, all of the videos that Ross has done are up on the YouTube channel, I believe, or our
Yeah,
YouTube
they're up
channel.
on YouTube.
They will be on X/Twitter, whatever you want to call it these days, and they're generally just a really, really good look at where we are tactically. On top of that, a few weeks back, Ross and Tom Hill did a tactical podcast and just talk tactics for 45, 50 minutes. So if you're into
Yeah, and
that
we'll
and
do
you
another
like
one of
that sort of
those
stuff, then
sometime soon.
go and have a look at that.
I don't
It's in
know
the
when.
back catalogue. And also, as well, if you've got anything that you want Ross to look at in particular, just send him a email, message, whatever. Drop it on his X account, and he can have a look at it. But yeah,
Yeah,
really good stuff as always, Ross. Really enjoyed this one. It's good to see the difference of where we are and what we're trying
yeah,
to
it's
do.
nice to
And
see a little bit of it's nice to see some growth in the team, and I think what you said, just to sum up my points, or close us out here. I liked what you said about finding identity again, and I think that one of the things we saw about Sellers is that at the start of the season is that he wasn't fully there as a manager or a game manager yet, but as a team builder and a squad builder. So it's a good manager to have, and I think that that's what we're starting to see now. And if this team has an identity, it's togetherness and hard work in that togetherness. Um, And I think that's sellers partly.
And that goes a long way in a football club. A football club that desperately needs it, put it that way.
Yeah.
We will see you back on the main pod over the weekend, early next week at some point, to review hopefully a win against Charlton as well as a win against Stevenage, which would top up a very, very good week indeed. As we said, check out all the other ones that Ross has done in terms of the tactical rundowns, and we will see you next time on either the pod or another tactical video.
So, guys, if you like this kind of content, please let us know. We love knowing what you like, whether it's the short, fast break videos, whether it's the mid range or the longer discussions like this on the tactics. Love making this kind of content for you guys. So subscribe, like the videos, helps us out always, and yeah, listen out for the pod and the next tactical videos. Like Ben said, see you next time.